G'day everyone, it's Glenn from Blackwings Fish here. Today's topic is tank repair, and I'm going to take you through a quick fix method using a simple product to repair a tank in the shortest space of time. It's one of my least favourite jobs. As I said, quick fix method, but not a shortcut. This will give you a great result if you follow the steps. Hope you enjoy it. Just at the outset, I want to make a little disclaimer. The method I'm going to talk about is appropriate for a tank that has a leaking seam or a popped seam. It's not going to be applicable to if you've actually got a crack in your glass. That's a whole different story. But the quick turnaround that I've alluded to in the intro is it's all based on me not having to pull the tank completely apart. Usually you can identify a corner where there's a seam that's leaking. It's usually evident by that's where the water drips out of your shelf. And in my case, the tank we're going to work on is pretty clear where the leak's coming from, but I'm going to do some future proofing by treating all four corners of the tank in the same method. Just do it once, do it well, and hopefully I won't have any more trouble out of that tank in the near future. Now, unfortunately, my shelving's starting to move a little bit. This time of year it always gets a bit damp in here, and this tank is now, in the last couple of days, I've got a seam leaking, I suspect, on the right hand end. So this will be another candidate for my method of fixing without pulling the tank completely apart. So one of the jobs I'm going to have to do pretty soon is to get these fish out into another tank and get this tank drained, because obviously it's going to keep leaking, and 200 litres of water onto the floor is not ideal at this time. So yeah, need to get this tank pulled down and dealt with pretty ASAP. So the repair I'm going to do has a basic set of tools and things that aren't going to blow your mind. If you've done any sort of amount of aquarium keeping and had an issue with a leaking tank, you've probably touched most of the stuff that you're going to see later on already. The point of difference today, that I'm using a material to aid in this repair, and that material is a cylindrical rod of glass, 6mm diameter, cheap product. Down here I'm buying this from a scientific instrument marketer, and you may remember this stuff from back in your days at high school, in shorter bits, stirring stuff in the chem lab. They are marketing this for glass stirring rod, so they sell it in big lengths and they'll cut it to whatever length you need. Believe you can also buy the products online. Down here in Tassie it was a bit hard to find, especially during lockdown, until I found this instruments provider. But I'm sure if you get on eBay, online, you'll find this stuff readily available. The only limitation being you might be bound to buying a significant quantity. In my case, I like to always have some of this stuff on hand. It's kind of like part of my fish room first aid cupboard, if you like, because as you'll see, the tanks they're getting a bit on, some of them, and these I've had leaking seams in probably 6 to 8 tanks over the last 2 years now, so it feels like this is a job I'm doing more and more, and obviously you don't want to be running off to the store every time it happens. So look into it. 6mm diameter glass stirring rod, very handy thing to have on hand. Alright, here's our basic kit of tools that we're going to need to get this job done today. The repair of this tank that's leaking from a seam. It's not necessarily a crack, so we're going to get this tank repaired in a pretty quick turnaround. It's going to be ready for me to put water back in 24 hours effectively, because the nature of this repair is such that we're not allowing for a whole tank to recure. We're only allowing for that bit that we patch to recure, and it's not under any weight loading, so as long as it's well skinned off, we're pretty safe to put water back in straight up. First thing we need is the safety blade for scratching out the silicon that's in the corners of the tanks, that's 12 years old now in this case, and is starting to develop weak spots from where I've been scrubbing glass and so forth over the journey. These little blades I find are best, just allows you to get nicely into corners at all angles. Sharper the better. Buy a 10 pack, probably good thing to have in your room for various little cleaning jobs on glass. Next, when we've got that surface clean, we need to get the grease, sort of get as much of the stuff that you don't feel necessarily off, to get back to as clean a glass as possible. So that squirty bottle's just full of some methylated spirits, which will help with that clean, and will then promptly dry afterwards, which is also a key thing whenever you're using silicon. You want dry glass. Here's our glass rod that I spoke about a bit earlier, 6mm diameter. We're going to, before we glue, we'll also give this a bit of a wipe with the metho, just to clean that surface off once again. We're using an Aquarium safe silicon today for glass, and I'm using clear silicon. I guess if you've got tanks with coloured backgrounds and so forth, you can probably find a coloured or tinted version, but I'm going just clear. And just check that it does mention that it's Aquarium safe, which it does in this case. For cutting our measuring and cutting our glass rod, texture to mark the length of rod. In my case, I'm not doing this for prettiness. All the ends of these rods are going to be, unless you go really looking for them, you're not going to cut yourself on them. But side cutters will snip this very well. And last thing you need is concrete slab, and I'll show you what that's all about later on. So here's our tank that has developed the leak over the journey. I strongly suspect it's on that right hand front corner there, based on the bit of water damage on the timber stand in that corner. But when I feel the vertical corners inside, that there's very little silicon being put there when these tanks were made. These tanks are about 12-13 years old now, custom built to fit my shed back in the day. But for whatever reason, when they were made, the silicon around the bottom perimeter is well formed, a good nice round bead of silicon up internally in that corner, which I believe the term in the trade is double siliconing. You when you make a tank, you normally glue the flat edge of that wall and drop it onto the base, but then you run that bead along the internal corner just to give it a second crack at a good seal. So the main thing I'm after here is, with cleaning, is to get as much of this little corner of silicon out as I can. It's old, you can almost pull it off with your fingernail. It's starting to get mould behind it. It's just a bit of a mess. Best way to do it, nice sharp blade, just get that wet and hard into the corner, both angles. Sometimes you have to go back the other way in both cases. And then you should be able to start to pull out some dangly bits. There we go. Sorry, not easy to do this one-handed and film at the same time. So
very old and failed, basically. Gets a bit awkward to, get right up into that corner. And bear in mind that with the way water works, I believe, and from an engineering point of view, the sort of centre of gravity of a tank, I think, appeals about a third of the way up the glass, which means that if it's going to pop anywhere, it's going to pop down the bottom half. The actual weight on the top isn't necessarily what you think it would be. Doesn't mean I'm not going to try and get this as clean as I can, top to bottom. And once again, sharp blade, and you'll certainly find this job a lot easier if you just keep wetting the area. I'm just using a bit of the cruddy water that's in the bottom of the tank, which we have to get out yet as well, but I'm just doing that because that's going to go to rubbish. I'm just going to get rid of all my little scraps of silicon. Anyway, that's probably as interesting as that's going to get, so we'll turn off and come back in a tick. Now I've finished scratching those corners out. I'm very confident that all the silicon I need to remove is now gone, so the next phase is to get this tank physically clean. I'm going to just give it a wash down the drain, and then I'm going to get all that last centimetre of water out. I'm probably just going to use my wet and dry vac to expedite that. Once again, not terribly exciting viewing, so I'll just get on with the clean up and join you in a minute.
Now, without boring you all to snorts with watching me measure and cut bits and pieces, that's all fairly self-explanatory. The main thing you need to know is just how easily this stuff cuts. Your standard old side cutters will go through this real easy. It's just a matter of getting it in near the hinge and just carefully doing it over a bin would probably be preferable, but you can see how easily that cuts. What I mentioned in the intro about earlier about the slab of concrete being important. If you've got any little sharp bits there, which there's a little bit of an edge there, just 3 or 4 scrapes on the concrete is going to be fine. And as I said earlier, if you if you want to find this in the corners of your tanks when you're cleaning, you may cut yourself, but you're really going to have to get your fingers in the corners hard to get into any trouble. So very easy to cut that part. Okay, so I'm at the point of no return now. This is the part that I dread, getting silicon out. It's messy if you're not very good at it, and I'm not very good at it. I've got my gun all ready with a fairly fine slice off the nozzle to try and get a small bead of silicon. Less is more sometimes, and I think this is one of those scenarios where I do want a good bead of silicon in this corner, but I don't want it to be flooding out, because when we push the glass rod in, it's going to squeeze the excess out in a couple of directions, and obviously the less excess and wastage the better, and the neater the job will be at the end. I've already cleaned all the corners with the methylated spirits on the rag earlier. I've cleaned all my glass rod, so I've just pulled the little nub out of the end of my gun, and it's time to have a crack. So I'll get into it, and we'll see how we go. Here's one I viewed earlier. I like to just creep it up and down that little bit, just to hopefully get a clean and even spread. I've obviously gone a bit too liberally down the bottom there, but as I said, I'm all about turnaround in this situation. It's not a display tank in your lounge room. This is a bit messy, but it also is very strong, and I hope to not be back here in this tank again in its lifetime. One. Don't forget to back off the pressure on your gun by releasing that little clicker at the end when you're putting it down, so that you're not getting a continuation of that silicone squeezing out. I'm going to use in the back corner the offcuts just to make use of what is effectively still a perfectly fine bit of rod that'll measure twice, cut once, my mother-in-law always says. Failed the briefing there by being a bit long. It's okay, it's a quick fix. Not the most even bead of silicone I've put up in that back corner. Once again, legally blind here, so I struggle to do certain jobs and do a lot by feel. Here is an example of that. So look, that's this end done. I'll be off camera now. I'm not going to touch my camera while I've got this gunk on my fingers. So listen to the noise, and I'll show you the results later on. Righto, we're a day on from the last bit of footage, and I am now ready to fill this tank back up and do a leak test. A key component to doing this, because obviously we want to identify as soon as possible if there's anything leaking. So first and foremost, when you get your hose back in the tank and running, be really careful not to spill any water on the outside of the tank, because we want to identify a leak as it happens. We don't want to be looking at water and wondering, is that a leak or is that some stuff I spilt? That's tip number one when you're leak testing for a tank. We want to know as soon as is physically possible whether we've got a good result. The second really important tip that I can give you, and it's especially applicable down here in Tasmania, where currently I think it's 6 degrees outside today, even though we're halfway through September. The water temperature out of the tap, if you just put cold water in, is running at about 10 or 11 degrees. And if I was to fill this tank up in my room as it currently stands, running at 26 degrees with the aircon, I would end up with a tank that's going to be wet just through the condensation that occurs from that 200 litres of 10 degree water sitting in a room at 26 degrees that's got humidity. So the trick is that the water that's running back into this tank at the moment is pre-mixed to around that 26 degrees, which is what I normally do with all my water changes, and that should keep that front glass from being dropping any humidity out, and
thereby we're not seeing a sort of a false positive with water forming on the outside of the glass, which we cannot be sure is a leak or is condensation. So yes, I'm gonna drop 200 litres of water, and the little bit of energy that went into warming that water, that 20 cents or so of gas that I might use to warm this water up, it's all about my time and getting a quick result. And I'll still use that 200 litres of water. I've got to put my once I'm happy that the tank isn't leaking, I'll be dropping my substrate back in, and I usually do that through this water, which will effectively give a bit of a wash of that sand, and then I'll dump that resulting 200 litres of water, and we should be good to fill up and put fish back in.
Righto, so we're about an hour on from last contact. I've spent probably 15 minutes with my blade once again, getting to the corners and just tidying up some of the some of my shoddy silicon work. As I mentioned before, I'm not very good with a gun, and the other aspect that complicates that a bit is I did this repair with the tank in situ. I didn't take it out of the shelf, which meant that fixing that end for me not so difficult, because being a dominant right hand, I could use the gun in my right hand in that corner comfortably, whereas down this end, left-handed, not so good. Having said that, I've cleaned this up pretty well with the blade, basically not disturbing that glass rod in any way. So we now have a solid bead of silicon in the corner in the curvature where the glass rod is jammed into the corner, and that also means you've got glass on glass where the diameter, I guess, of that rod hits the glass 3mm out from the corner, if that makes sense. Probably haven't explained that very well. I've scraped the blade up and down that outermost crevice just to tidy up my daggy bits, and if you were to use a bit of corner seal on the outside, you wouldn't even know it'd been here. So pretty happy with this as once again, as I keep saying, a quick fix, but still giving us a decent result. You'll notice up on the surface some scraps of silicon, which I will net out when I start to drain this tank shortly. As I'm cleaning up my mess, I'm super confident that we've eliminated this leak. When this tank leaked, it dropped about 40 litres of water on the floor overnight, so it was a significant little drip. This has only been an hour, and if it was a really, really tiny leak, you'd probably want to wait longer to be really sure, but totally dry on this front where the problem was, and given that it was a significant leak and now there's no leak, no obvious leak, I'm happy that I've nailed it, and I'm willing to put this all back together today. And just to illustrate that point I was making before about putting the water back in warm in a humid room, this glass is as dry as a chip. I've used a bit of window cleaner to clean it up a bit from the last shot, and just to show you, this is a glass of water from the tap outside, and you can see that that water's at about the 10 or 11 degrees, and our glass is quite foggy, and that's due to the condensation that's formed in here from humidity. So, important tip, when you're doing your leak testing, make sure you've got that water in at a typical temperature for your room, so that you're not getting that false positive from having condensation enter into the equation and create a possible confusion. Righto, so I'm at the point now where I'm rebuilding my tank. I'm going to put some new sand in. I'll talk about sand in another video one day, and the sand that I use and why I use it. This tank is 1.2 metres long by 0.45 wide. We're going to round that out to 1.2 by 0.5, so about 0.6 square metres of footprint. And I like to run with about a 1 centimetre deep layer of sand on the bottom. So I think that works out at about 6 litres of sand needs to go in. Got my all-purpose U-Butte tool for the fish shed, a old 2 litre ice cream container, and I'm going to put in 3 of those. I want to make use of this water that's been used to leak test the tank, and it's been used for me to clean a bit of silicon overrun off. So that water will be going to drain, and don't worry, I'll net out bits of silicon. But I can use it to my advantage to give this sand a good rinse. This, when I buy the sand, it's already washed, but it doesn't mean to say there's not going to be some fines in that still. So I might as well make the most of a good solid rinse straight off the bat. Righto, so there's my 6 kilos, 6 litres of sand in. I'm now going to open my drain valve underneath and get rid of that now cloudy water. Just going to do a rough level by hand. It's obviously a bit hard to see with the murk, but we'll do this in a more polished fashion at the end. Obviously we want to just keep knocking this surface film down, which is what I think is an incredibly fine particle of sand mostly, but it will cloud the water for the first few times I do water changes until it gradually goes to drain. Put my little strainer on the drain just so I don't lose any silicon at this point. Keep the environmentalists happy. I'm just going to use my net now that the level's dropping to start capturing all those daggy bits of silicon that are floating. greasy. Not good for your side cutters.
So Percy's come out to help do the final check on the tank. We're another day on from the last bit of footage. I didn't think anyone would be terribly interested in watching me put rocks and stuff in a tank. This water's cleared out a little bit from the new sand. Fish are looking happy. We've just gone with a few electric yellows just to be on the safe end, just in case there was a bit of a reaction to anything I've done, but based on them having fed well this morning, I'm happy and satisfied with the outcome on this repair. So in summation, just remember those steps with preparation is key. Getting the areas you're going to silicon. No matter what nature of repair you ever do with silicon, you want clean glass, dry glass. You're going to struggle if you don't have that. In terms of the actual time frame, obviously I took some time to get around to doing the repair once I drained the tank of fish when the initial leak occurred. We all know what it takes to drain a tank and get everything out of it. That was an hour's work. But in terms of the physical repair, it probably took me 15 minutes to clean up the 4 corners in preparation for gluing. It took all of about 2 minutes to cut the glass rods to length. It probably took me 12 minutes to do the silicon and installation of those glass rods, and it probably took me quarter of an hour to 20 minutes doing a bit of clean up afterwards of my shoddy silicon work. So the actual labour to do the repair would have amounted to about an hour in real terms. The slow part of the whole process is just that leak testing and being confident that you've got that seal completed and have nailed the leak down. And if you follow those couple of tips I showed you with the warm water, you're going to arrive at that result a lot quicker. So look, I hope you've enjoyed my video. And that this repair method may get you out of trouble one day. Thanks for watching.